Barbara Arrowsmith-Young was born with severe learning disabilities that caused teachers to label her slow, stubborn, or even worse. In her book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, Barbara explains how she literally changed her brain to do all the things that you and I take for granted. And she joins us now. Welcome, Barbara. Thank you. So Barbara, as a child, you continually wrote backwards, is that right?
I read backwards. In grade 1, my teacher told my mother I had a mental block, and I thought that I actually had a piece of wood in my head that made learning difficult. And really, I didn't have a piece of wood, but I might as well have had. I had significant learning disabilities, and this was in the 1950s when there wasn't even a term learning disability.
Yeah.
So basically, it was a life sentence. I mean, I was told at that point I would never learn like other children. I was put in the turtle learning group. I was given the strap in grade 1 because I started developing avoidant behaviors, like hanging out in the washroom, trying to stay out of the classroom. And my teacher really thought I was doing this deliberately, and I wasn't that clever to be able to do this deliberately.
Wow, so that is an amazing, horrible experience to go through. How long before you started to recognise it for what it was?
It really, I mean, I knew right from that point that I didn't learn like other children did. I mean, I watched my classmates all be able to do things that I couldn't do. And
there's some of your writing
yes,
there.
that's my great reversals. And when I would add numbers, if it was 12 plus 13, I would add it. I would reverse it 21 plus 31, and then I would reverse the answer. So it was really, my world was incomprehensible. So eventually, I learned how to read and write the correct way. My mother was an educator, so she drilled me with flashcards. I became a workaholic in grade 1. I would work at lunchtime. I would work after school. But the fundamental learning disability was still there. I couldn't understand language. So even having this conversation here, I wouldn't have been able to do.
Wow.
Because if you asked me a question, it would be like a foreign language. I mean, I could hear the words, but I wouldn't be able to interpret what you were saying. And I had a phenomenal memory, so I would go away afterwards, and I almost like a tape recorder, but not understanding. I would play it over and over and over again to try to interpret. But by that time, the conversation was gone, so I couldn't participate. I mean, it was isolating. I had horrible moments of despair. So I couldn't fit in academically, and I couldn't fit in socially. And then I had another disorder. This whole left side of my body was almost like a stroke victim. Like I wouldn't be able to reach out and pick up this cup. I mean, if I tried to pick up this cup with my left hand, I would end up wearing the water. I was constantly bruised. I have scars on various parts of my body where I ran into things. So I wasn't good athletically. Like some children that aren't good academically fit in socially, or they fit in athletically. I had sort of every deficit going that really made my world difficult. And I also was very driven. I came from a family, my father had 30 patents, he was an inventor.
Yeah.
And he believed that if something didn't exist, that wasn't a barrier, you went out and created it. Wow. So I was constantly hunting for a solution to my difficulty.
And can I ask, before that happened though, like before you had adults or an understanding of what you have now, did you almost have an out-of-body experience? Did you take yourself out of your body to kind of assess what was happening to a young person? Like, Ray, what are you talking about? Like, how did you cope almost being two people? Would that be right to say?
It was very, my world was very fragmented, exactly. I mean, I felt like I was just buffeted by random events, like even cause and effect, like why something happened. I couldn't put things together to understand. So, you know, I felt just confused all the time.
So Barbara, can you explain, I mean, for hundreds of years, we've been led to believe that the brain is hardwired, and so people have been taught to work around their problems, and you found a way to work with and through your problems. Can you explain how you've done that?
It's the sort of the principle of neuroplasticity, that we now know that the brain can change, that through really, really targeted stimulation or exercise, you can actually go in and change the brain at a physiological level. And that's what I believe I did. In 1978, I came across 2 lines of research, one coming out of Russia, Luria, identifying function of the different brain areas. So I thought if I could understand what the brain area does, and I could never tell time, so I created my first exercise with clocks to force that part of the brain to process information. That maybe I could change it, and as I did that exercise, it was incredible. I mean, I started to be able to listen to conversations and understand them in real time.
So it's quite a quick
It was
changed
within 3 to 4 months.
Oh, and how old were you?
I was 26.
Okay.
So when you say doing exercises, it's like you're laying down an imprint for your thought processes to follow, which that they can then follow more easily as you exercise more.
That's correct. I think what's happening is that the brain, like increasing neurotransmitters, increasing like the dendrite branching. So if we have more branches on those neurons, there's better communication. I think the brain is changing in those areas so that the learning can go forward. And I've tracked people now 30 years out of the program, myself included, and it's not really like a muscle. There's no drop-off in function. Once the brain is functioning the way it should, it continues to function that way.
Especially if you keep using it. And you used it to the point of going to uni and getting degrees.
Yes.
And forming a school.
Yes, I have a school, and the basic premise of my school is working with children with learning disabilities and not accepting the limitations, changing the learner, like really fundamentally changing the learner's brain to be able to learn anything, whereas traditional special ed compensates, like it finds workarounds. If there's a problem in an area, find a strength to support that problem. I'm saying you go right into the difficulty, you target it, you stimulate it, you build it up, and then the learning goes forward.
And they're quite short, intensive exercises. What's an example of one of the exercises you do?
One of them, if you think about visual memory, like the child that's dyslexic. So if you're good here, you can think of the word cat, you can close your eyes, you can see it on a blackboard. These children can't hold the visual image. So I have 40 different languages, from Telugu, Tamil, Burmese, Sinhalese, and the child sees a symbol on the computer screen. They can't put meaning to it, they can't put sound to it, because I want to target that area. And they have to look at it, close their eyes, try to visualize it, and then they see it in a whole array with other symbols. And by the time they can memorize 8 Chinese characters, the whole visual ability to learn symbols changes. They can read, they can spell, they can learn chemical equations, they can learn mathematical formulas.
So it's just like working a muscle, like an athlete, you know, working a muscle.
Just
I'm confused.
targeting that.
Why do you have the Chinese in there?
Because we don't want the person to put sound to it, which would be a compensation.
I see.
So it has to be something that's novel, that they're not familiar with, and I don't want them to put meaning to it, because I want to target, this is part of the brain back here, I want to target the visual memory aspect. And so we use the foreign languages to isolate that.
And another thing that fascinated me in your book was the lack of spatial awareness, getting lost constantly, which is something that must plague a person and could turn someone into a recluse. Can you explain about spatial awareness?
Yes, well, I had that difficulty, and I couldn't construct maps in my head. It was even more than that. Like, I couldn't think my way into 3-dimensional space. So if I closed my closet door, it didn't exist. Like, my clothes didn't exist anymore. If I put something in a drawer and closed it, because I couldn't visualize into space. To me, the world was flat. I couldn't construct things, or if I did, I built everything backwards. If I sewed everything in reverse. And I think that I inherited from my mother. We always got lost if we went anywhere together. But I created an exercise. I don't get lost anymore.
Well, your story is an extraordinary one. Would you please thank Barbara Arrowsmith? That's remarkable. And studio audience, good news, you're all taking home a copy of Barbara's book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. It's Friday, you're watching The Circle, and we'll catch up with the first MasterChef contestant to be eliminated, Big Kev.